In 2010, one phone call kept Neymar at Santos. The Brazilian prodigy was 17 years old and in demand from the biggest clubs in the world, but given that Santos had recently sold their biggest stars like Robinho and Elano, how did they in fact keep Neymar there until he was 23? It's all explained in Henrik Brandao Jonsson's brilliant and at times eccentric book, Jogo Bonito. It's a deep dive into how football permeates Brazilian society. In the book, Jonsson sets off in hot pursuit of Neymar, tells us about the amateur tournaments which feature beauty contests, and explores the hometown of the two-time World Cup winner who many Brazilians feel was better than Pele. In this video, I'll discuss the main themes in the book and give you my honest thoughts on it. So as Jonsson travels through Brazil before they host the 2014 World Cup, he actually follows Neymar and ends up at the Players' Baptist Church. There's also a great scene in the book where Jonsson is just so desperate to speak to Neymar and he actually goes to the Santos Stadium and he's chatting with a member of their museum staff and he convinces the guy to just let him through an emergency exit. He manages to find Neymar's locker in the Santos dressing room and he actually just leaves his phone number on a piece of paper telling him to call him. And I think that's the kind of like eccentric vibe that this book really gives, and I'll discuss a little more of that in a little bit. So this was during Neymar's first stint with Santos between 2009 and 2013. Jonsson then finally reaches Neymar at a crowded visitors enclosure as fans flock to the young superstar and crush against barriers. Neymar poses for pictures, signs autographs, and there's also a great moment when a family actually lift their baby over the kind of barriers and give the baby to Neymar to fuss over. Eventually, Jonsson just pushes his way through the crowd and asks Neymar when he'll be moving to Europe. Neymar just grins and playfully wags his finger in Jonsson's face as if to say, not too fast. Now, I felt this was a really charming scene in the book. It shows, the kind of status that the Brazilians hold Neymar in, and it also showed the almost comic lengths that Jonsson would go to speak to Neymar and get his scoop. So this is of course well before Neymar became Brazil's all-time leading goal scorer and won the Champions League and 2 Club World Cups. Indeed, Neymar had previously worked Brazil into a frenzy ahead of the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. After bursting onto the scene with Santos in 2009 and scoring in the Campeonato Paulista semi-final first leg, the man who at 13 had a trial at Real Madrid was all the rage. Jonsson charts how the Brazil national team manager Dunga was heavily criticised for picking Graffiti over Neymar in his 2010 World Cup squad. Graffiti was the ultimate one-season wonder and had just scored 28 goals in 25 appearances as he led Wolfsburg to the Bundesliga title. He was a real flash in the pan and kind of reminiscent of someone like Michu or Amir Zaki. So as Brazil threw away a lead in the 2010 World Cup quarter-final against the Netherlands, Graffiti played 5 minutes throughout the whole tournament, all of them in a thrilling 0-0 draw with Portugal. So the rest of this video will be a second-by-second analysis of Graffiti's movements in that 5-minute stint. Nah, I'm only joking. Either way, Dunga was heavily criticised for overlooking attacking talent, the likes of which were Neymar, Adriano and Pato. So back at Santos now, Jonsson tells us how in 2010 Pele played a key role in keeping Neymar at the club. Now, the Santos president, Luis Alvaro de Oliveira Ribeiro, had offered Neymar the world to stay at the club. $6 million a year, a stylist, a nutritionist, an English teacher, and not to mention this $6 million a year salary would make Neymar the highest paid Brazilian-based footballer of all time. And still, Neymar Sr., who represented his son, still played hard to get. So as Jonsson puts it, it looks like Neymar Sr. really had his heart set on his son joining Chelsea. That was until Ribeiro just picked up the phone, dialed Pele, and the legend convinced Neymar Sr. to keep his son with Santos. And it's quite funny the way that Jonsson describes this scene in the book, because it is literally like they've got to the end of the negotiations. Neymar Sr. just is not budging a touch. So Romario just picks up the phone and he's just like, hello, yep. And then he gives him the phone and he's just like, oh yeah, I've just got Pele and the blower, like you do. And when Pele talks to Neymar Sr., he tells him about how much Robinho struggled in Europe, how much Neymar might struggle with the language and the culture of moving to London. He said, "We can turn your son into Brazil's new idol." With that, Neymar Sr. relented and turned away from Chelsea, despite the Blues' fantastic record of never just destroying young talent. And if you're enjoying the World Cup, you can also watch my review of the Mbappe project. I will put that link on the screen right now. So they say that Brazil's biggest passions are football and sex. Jonsson discovers a tradition which leans into both of these areas, the Pelados. These are essentially amateur football contests which also link in with beauty contests. So every football team which enters will also have its beauty queen, so to speak, and then they'll actually have a contest. Indeed, Pelador, when you put it into English, translates roughly as super starkers, which is convenient. In terms of a beauty tournament, there's also a reality TV show which is screened across Brazil, which shows the beauty queens living together in a yacht. Not sure I really want to watch that, to be honest. Doesn't really sound that exciting, but there you go. While the competition between the women is rife, it's no less competitive on the football pitch. The games consist of 30-minute halves, with no offsides and gravel pitches. Jonsson attends a Faria match and watches from pitch side as home fans try to bribe the referee. Later, tensions boil over on the pitch and policemen arrive with rifles. And it's these kind of real travelogue scenes in the book where you can really see through Jonsson's eyes, and he really just throws you directly into the scene. And it's just such a well-written book, very, very eccentric. And yeah, this scene was just so much fun. I also really like this idea of looking at Brazilian grassroots culture, and it's also just another example of how football and Brazil's love of beautiful women just really kind of intertwine here. One man who represented Brazil's hedonistic attitude to life and liberal approach to sex was Garrincha, the bandy-legged showman who helped Brazil win the World Cup in 1958 and 1962. So who won it in 66? I can't quite remember, can you? Garrincha lived in Pau Grande, which, as Jonsson delicately puts it, translates roughly to big cock. There's a great moment in the book where Jonsson is basically travelling around the town and he actually asks a bystander on the pavement whereabouts Pau Grande is, and the guy just kind of grabs his crotch and just says, "It's right there!" This is actually one of many light-hearted moments in the book, and you get the sense that Jonsson is kind of muddling through this trip, and I think that makes the book a lot funnier and a lot more authentic. It's definitely a travel log as well as a football book, and that just adds so much character. So while Garrincha was well known for dribbling around goalkeepers and also nutmegging the great Nilson Santos during a trial with Botafogo, he was actually described as a sex machine because of his skills in seduction. He was someone who never cared about fame or riches, and his first pay as a footballer was actually $25. He slept on the concrete at the Botafogo stadium and really never wanted to be a professional footballer. He just happened to be really good at it. I think it was those nutmegs on Nilson Santos where they really thought, okay, yeah, we have something. We absolutely have to get this guy to sign a contract with us. It's pretty incredible how from there he would go on to become one of Brazil's greatest ever footballers. And although Garrincha suffered with alcoholism and weight issues later in life, the Seleção were a formidable force with him in the side. His final record for Brazil was 152, drawn 7 and lost 1. So while Garrincha's Botafogo are one of the biggest clubs in Rio, Corinthians are one of the giants in Sao Paulo. Jonsson is offered cocaine and weed by Corinthians' violent hooligans, and he also uncovers Corinthians' fight for democracy in football. Of course, in the 1980s, the great midfielder Socrates pushed democracy with Corinthians so hard, to the point where in 1982, ahead of Brazil's first free election for 20 years, Corinthians wore shirts reading "Vote on the 15th." And Corinthians fans are steeped in working class culture, and they actually helped build the club's first ever stadium. Their hooligan group, the Hawks, are notoriously violent and actually had contacts with the PCC, who are one of Latin America's biggest drug gangs. And Jonsson was just met with guarded responses when trying to travel to an away game with the Hawks. Finally, he meets a skinhead called Almau, who reluctantly initiates Jonsson into their group. Now, all these hooligans have tattoos across their faces, facial piercing, they're just completely dressed in black, and they tease Jonsson about whether he prefers Brazilian powder or, as they put it, Brazilian beaver. And they're just taking a piss out of Jonsson all throughout this bus journey, and eventually he smokes a joint with them. And after he's smoking and gets a little bit stoned, he just becomes absolutely sick of listening to them just ripping to pieces with their insults and their jokes, and he basically just tells them to fuck off. And that's the point where they finally gain some respect for him. It's a few moments later that the bus then stops and some of the fans get out and just start beating up rival fans. It's also really crazy because the driver seems to be in on this as well, because he'll literally drive up to the pavement, screech to a halt, let the guys off to start a fight, let them come back on, and then he just speeds off again. It's at this point that an old woman on the bus turns to Jonsson and says, "Don't be angry with them, they're nice boys really, they just wanted to test you." Well, as long as they're nice boys, that's fine then. So to sum up, this is a brilliant first-person football travelogue with such a sense of fun and heart and soul. When Jonsson talks about how passionate the Brazilian people are about healthcare and education, and how they protested that the 2014 World Cup funds should be going to those areas, it really taps into how much Brazil really kind of cares about these social issues, and Jonsson really peels back what it's like to be a Brazilian person, and he really gets under their skin. After all, $10 billion of taxpayers' money was put towards renovating stadiums in Brazil before the 2014 World Cup. That is more than the previous 3 World Cups combined. Jonsson goes deeper into this thread and says that there's a theory in Brazil that the authorities are really good at taking people's money in taxes, but they're not very good at putting that money into healthcare or education. The link between football and politics grew even stronger in 2010 when Romario became a member of the Brazilian Congress. There's a wonderful moment where Jonsson finds himself beside Romario's pool chatting with the striker, and in his head Jonsson is just like, how have I got here? Romario tells Jonsson about his daughter who has Down syndrome and talks about what he wants to do for disability rights in Brazil. Jonsson takes us further into Brazilian culture when he gets pissed with Brazil's most famous commentator, Galvão Bueno. He also pays a visit to the home of the World Cup winning manager, Mauro Zagallo. So this book really covers everything. It covers, violence, hooliganism, politics, sex, the economy in Brazil. It's got a little bit of everything. It's such a fun read, and I would highly recommend you read it as soon as possible. So that pretty much sums it up. Thank you so much for watching. See you soon.